Hospital Porters, Pride and Dignity, Stop the New World Order. Welcome to Panwo TV. Can I begin by just saying that I've got a new policy on this channel as regards comments in the comments box. Now, some of you already know about this. I've actually made a video all about this, but basically if you put a comment in the comments box, I won't reply to it by writing underneath, most likely. I might do, depends how many I get, but what I'll probably do is just reply to it in a video I'll make in the future. The reason for this is I'm getting too many comments and I don't have enough time to reply to them all. And I want to reply to them all because I do appreciate it when you do give me feedback on these videos. And some of you are very generous with what you say in terms of the length and complexity of what you go to when you talk about these videos on Panwo TV. So that's what I'll be doing. So to keep your eye out on the channel for a comments video coming up, which is where if you put a comment on this video, you will probably get a comment there. Now, the reason I'm making this video is because I heard that someone has died. Someone I know, I call him a friend. I mean, he's not a friend. I don't know him very well. I met him twice and spent a couple of hours with him. That doesn't count as a friendship, but he's someone I sort of respect, and the more I spoke to him, the more genuine. I do feel he's genuine. He had a very, very incredible story to tell, but I do get the feeling he's for real. Because I could be wrong. He could be making it all up. But I first met him in 2006, so that was 10 years ago. But what happened was I used to be a member of a web forum. This is when I just started out with Panwo. I started Panwo in late 2006. This is before then. But I also was a reader of Nexus magazine, and still am today. Nexus had just completed a series of fascinating articles. There were 3 articles. Well, it was a 3-part article, in other words, covering 3 issues. It was called Britain's Secret War in Antarctica. And so I was on this web forum discussing this very eagerly with various people on the forum. It's a forum that no longer exists, unfortunately. Everything's been Facebook's now, isn't it? It's Facebook this, Facebook that. That's why I maintain the Panwo forum. To keep, so I keep the old traditional forums alive. But I digress. Someone PM'd me on the forum. He joined the forum. He only made a couple of posts on there, and he PM'd me. I did learn his real name. I'm not going to tell you what it is, but I'm not going to tell you his username either on the forum. The forum's gone anyway. But he said he wanted to meet me, and he wanted to talk to me about what I'd been talking about. So I said I'd meet up with him. He seemed very eager and very insistent. So I met this guy in a town near Oxford. I actually travelled by bus to a town near Oxford, and I met up with him. And he told me it's not me. He wasn't the guy I should be talking to. He basically said, I know someone you should talk to. I just wanted to arrange a meeting between you and somebody I know you'll find interesting to talk to. And he says, but you must not say a word to anyone. You must not. You must keep this completely confidential. And instead, indeed I did. I didn't actually. It was only when this guy actually. I met this guy. I met the person he wanted me to meet, and this person said I must not talk about what he was saying. But then eventually he did give me permission, and I wrote an article on her Panwo, which is linked in the description box. But I felt nervous because he seemed very. There's no doubt that he said it was for safety's sake, my safety and the safety of this person. And I got nervous about that. But then I think a lot of this person and the person I met withheld a lot of information from me. Because, I don't even, the name this middleman who contacted me on the forum, the name he gave me, I don't even know if that's his real name. If I was ever interrogated about this affair, I wouldn't be able to tell you much more than what I'm revealing to you now. And probably that's for the best, probably, for my safety and for this person's safety. So he said, this guy, I met him in a town outside Oxford, and he said, I know a man who you should talk to. He'll come to Oxford and meet you. And I said, okay. So he said, where shall we meet? And I said, okay. And so I gave him the name of a pub. in suburban Oxford. I didn't want to meet in the city centre because I wanted. He said somewhere quiet where you can talk. So it was a weekday night, and in a suburban pub. And so he did. He made this arrangement, and I met up with him. I went to this pub at the appointed time. I sat there and I waited, and eventually, this guy I'd never met before, who I don't know where he lived. I don't know anything about him. He just showed up and we talked. Now, to understand what's going on in this story, you need to learn a little bit about Antarctica. Just acquaint yourself with this continent. It's got a very short but very complex history, both official and unofficial. Now, firstly, it's unique among continents in which it has no indigenous human population at all. It's the largest uninhabited area on Earth. It's a huge wilderness of freezing ice cap and ice-covered sea, the size of Europe and the United States combined. And until the late 19th century, it was virtually unknown. It's surrounded by a belt of sea ice, hundreds of miles thick. Even this was only spotted by Captain Cook in 1774. The first landing on Antarctica didn't take place until 1895. In the succeeding 2 decades after that, much of the continental interior was explored. People like Roald Amundsen, the first man to reach the South Pole, Ernest Shackleton, who became obsessed with Antarctica, and of course the ill-fated expedition of Captain Robert Scott. And he's just one of many explorers for whom Antarctica became his grave. So all through the early 20th century there was a period of expansion and exploration. Many nations set up bases there. Many of them carried out small-scale exploration, various places around the continent. In fact, it's only really in the 1930s when things become interesting, really interesting, if you're not into polar exploration. This is after the rise of the Nazis in Germany, and that's where official and unofficial history significantly diverge. Now, the most interesting thing that ever happened, I think, in Antarctic history is the German Antarctic expedition of 1938 to 1939. This is important when you're talking about Antarctica, is that basically everything that goes on there happens in the summer, because in the winter it's too damn cold, basically. Everything I'm going to talk about in terms of the years when they happen will have 2 dates. Most of them will have 2 dates. So 1938 and 1939 is basically the summer. Of course, the southern summer is the northern winter, so basically they went down there towards the end of 1938 and stayed through the summer until 1939. Winter in Antarctica is would be our spring and summer in the north, unless you're Australian or something, which gets so cold there you just can't do anything. So the German Antarctic expedition of 1938-39, and even in the summer it gets bloody cold down there, was sent there, and the ostensible mission was to set up a whaling station on the east coast. Now, I hate whale hunting. It's the most horrible thing imaginable. Evil. But that's not what it was really for, anyway. But they said they were going to set up a whaling station on the eastern coast of Antarctica, in this area called New Swabia, or Neuschwabenland, as they call it. Now, on the map I just showed you just now, it's around the area of Queen Maud Land in eastern Antarctica. Now, when they landed there, they claimed that region for history, for Hitler's Nazi Third Reich, even though it's been part of an area already claimed by Norway. Queen Maud Land is like a Norwegian territory. I think it's Norwegian territory today. But a region of that was sealed off by the Nazi Third Reich and called New Swabia, German territory. And I don't think the Norwegians bothered trying to do anything about it because they were too busy in Europe, because by then World War II broke out. And so there was, for the next 6 years, Germany and the Allies were at loggerheads, and they were at loggerheads for control of the seas. Now, eventually the war drew to a close. Defeat loomed for Hitler and the other leaders of the Third Reich, and they knew that they were going to go to Nuremberg, and they knew very well that they'd be tried as war criminals and executed, so they basically had to flee for their lives. So they were looking for a bolt hole. That's interesting, a bolt hole. So where could they go? Now, this is a big subject. What you're looking at now is the remains of Hitler's bunker after the Red Army had invaded at the end of World War II, and all kinds of horrible things happened to Germany after that, and Oh, it was horrible. But basically, that's what remained of Hitler's bunker, and today it's just like a little corner street somewhere. But yeah, when the Soviets took over that part of Germany, they just obliterated every sign that the Nazi regime had ever been there. That's a long story and a pretty horrible one. But the official. This is another long story, one I don't have time to go into detail right now. But I'll probably do another video or article about it or something. But the official history says that Hitler committed suicide. He shot himself in that bunker just before the Soviet troops arrived, and all his assistants, his lieutenants, his secretaries burned his body. You've seen that. You must have seen that downfall meme where you could put your own subtitles on it, where Hitler goes crazy and he knows he's lost. But the actual evidence for this happening in real life is very thin, very contradictory. As I said, it's a long story. There's things like the body wasn't Hitler's. We know that because the Soviets took dental records. Those dental records were released at the end of the Soviet era in the early 90s, and they weren't Hitler's. They didn't match with Hitler's dentist's records. So Hitler escaped, I think. If so, where did he go? Because escape was possible. He was the most powerful man in the country by far. He was the Führer. They had captured Allied aircraft in a hangar at an airbase close to Berlin. They could have flown Hitler out, flown him over the Allied lines to a friendly harbour, arranged for a submarine to meet them to get Hitler out. And people say, well, that wouldn't have worked because the Allies had won the Battle of the Atlantic. No U-boat could operate without being sunk. Well, to be honest, that's not true, right? I think you've got to qualify that. It's true. No, it's more accurate to say that no U-boat could carry out offensive operations in the Atlantic anymore because the ships are too well defended. But we're not talking about that. We're talking about a submarine that's not trying to attack someone else. We're talking about a submarine that's just trying to stay hidden, keep out of everyone else's way. That's actually doubtful that's even possible. Locating and sinking a submarine that attacks you is one thing. Trying to find a submarine that doesn't want to be found is another matter entirely. It's like trying to hunt a particular rabbit by walking along the country lanes of England with a shotgun. And this is an intelligent rabbit. It can hear you coming from a great distance and get into its burrow long before you're close enough to threaten it. Germany had some new submarines, Type 21s, these like modern submarines with a snort mast, so it wouldn't need to surface completely to recharge its battery and air supply. It could come to periscope depth and raise a snort mast. So this is probably the kind of vessel Hitler would have chosen to make his escape. But where could he go? Where could the world's most wanted man hide? All the Third Reich territories have been invaded. They've been occupied by the Allies. So where in the world was there anywhere else the Nazis did have an outpost that hadn't yet been captured? One that was so remote, so isolated, and in such an inaccessible place that nobody will reach it for years. Now we know an awful lot about Hitler going to Argentina and Brazil. There's stories of him in South America. That's possible, but he didn't go straight there. I think he went to New Swabia. Yes, indeed, New Swabia, Neuschwabenland, Antarctica. And the person the guy I've been talking about, Jack. He's not the only one where information has come to light, but it reveals that the Nazis had a huge infrastructure down there. An enclave, there was a harbour, an airbase, an underground port for submarines, and there's even some who claim that the Nazis were constructing a new Berlin, which was similar to the old Berlin, though obviously you couldn't have the open-air cafeterias. You'd need to wrap up warm when you went out on the street. But maybe they plan to recover their strength, launch a new war. They could continue their work on esoteric vehicle propulsions and energy sources, black magic. I'll be saying more about that in a minute. Occult powers. So yeah, I mean, it's the perfect place. I mean, who's going to find them there? Who's going to? I mean, obviously they will eventually, but it gave Hitler a very, very long and very luxurious breathing space. Now the war ended in 1945, officially ended then, with the fact that the Allies had completely taken over all Europe, and Europe was then split between the capitalist West and the Soviet East, and that was the situation as it lasted till the end of the Cold War. But less than a year later, a massive fleet of 13 ships, at least 13, that was what was admitted to, including 4,700 sailors, soldiers and government scientists, set sail for Antarctica. This is many times the number of people who've ever visited Antarctica before. And this mission was called Operation Highjump, and it cost billions of dollars. And it's very interesting. If you go to YouTube, or it used to be on Google Video, but I think it's on YouTube still, there's a US government-produced documentary that was shown in cinemas all over the world. It's only an hour long. It's called The Secret Land. So it's not quite full. It's not quite feature length, but it includes opening scenes where there's the Secretary of Defense, Admiral James Forrestal, Admiral Chester Nimitz, the Chief of Naval Operations during World War II, Admiral Richard Byrd, the famous explorer of the poles, and Admiral Richard Cruzen, who commanded one of the secondary high jump fleets, because there were like 3 fleets. Now, the funny thing is, this was in the opening scene where they describe what they're doing. They're going to go and explore Antarctica, prospect for valuable minerals and oil, do some scientific research. Why do they need a massive task force, a massive naval task force to do that, I wonder? Another strange thing, 2 of the 4 men in the opening scene, Forrestal and Byrd, were struck down by mental illness and suspicious premature death after the campaign was over. Now, what are the odds of that? Now, another thing, I mean, Forrestal, I think the reason Forrestal died may well have more to do with the UFO issue than Antarctica, but I mean, maybe there's a connection, maybe it's a combination of both. Anyway, Byrd was declared barking mad. He was locked up in a mental asylum. He died eventually. So check out The Secret Land on YouTube. Now, but when you watch it, be aware that you're watching an official United States government production made on commission by a selected cast and crew with an approved script and production design. The Secret Land is what the government wishes the public to think happened during the 1946-1947 Operation Highjump mission. They're portraying the project the way they want it to be perceived. But there are some relevant questions if you watch the movie. Watch the movie first. But again, why do you need a massive naval task force to set up a base and go prospecting for tin and copper and steel and iron and things like that? Couldn't a smaller scale operation do that? Because that's perfect. You know, mineral prospecting has been perfectly possible before. Now, what good would minerals be if you're mining them and transporting them out of such a hostile environment? Would it be economic? The same goes for oil. You know, because there's so much ice and cold down there. You need to take special. It costs an awful lot of money to do anything down there. You've got to keep the people alive, basically. Bring food in for them. There's no food there. Bring them in heat their vehicles, their houses, everything. Another thing in this video, it shows that they used huskies. The huskies were inoculated. They were given vaccines. Why? Are there dangerous bacteria and viruses in Antarctica? Now, another ostensible motive for Operation Highjump was to train the American forces in polar warfare. So they went all the way to Antarctica to do that. Why? Within the borders of the United States, there's places where you can do that. How about Alaska? Alaska is where they filmed the Star Wars and when it was on Hoth, The Empire Strikes Back. Yeah, see how cold that is. You can train the troops in Arctic warfare there. Now, there's also a strange incident happened to Admiral Byrd. He went missing for 3 hours on a routine exploration flight, and the Silent Land portrays this, and you can see them jettisoning non-essential equipment so they have enough fuel to get back. That, of course, was a reconstruction done afterwards for the movie. But a very, very strange thing came from someone called Captain Wilhelm Schausch, a naval officer, a researcher into this issue. And he came up with this strange idea that he believes that Byrd found some kind of hidden land at the South Pole. Now, he says it's an inner Earth. He believes in the hollow Earth theory. Now, I used to go along with that. I don't anymore. But anyway, there's some strange things in Captain Byrd's log. 1000 hours. This is a quote from the log. 1000 hours. We are crossing over the small mountain range and are still proceeding northwards as best as can be ascertained. Beyond the mountain range is what appears to be a valley with a small river or stream running through the centre portion.
There should be no green valley below. Something is definitely wrong and abnormal here. We should be over ice and snow. To the port side are great forests growing on the mountain slope. Our navigation instruments are still spinning. The gyroscope is oscillating back and forth. 10:05 hours. I order a change in altitude to 1400 feet, execute a sharp turn left to better examine the valley. It's green with moss and tight-knit grass. Light here seems different. I can't see the sun. We make another left turn and we spot what looks to be a large animal of some kind. It appears to be an elephant. My goodness, it's a mammoth. This is incredible. There it is. I decrease altitude to 1000 feet, take binoculars, examine the animal. It's definitely a mammoth. I've got to report this to base camp. 10:30 hours. Encountering more rolling green hills. The external temperature indicator reads 74 degrees Fahrenheit. 11:30 hours. My God, off our port and starboard wings are strange types of aircraft. They're closing rapidly alongside. They are disc-shaped and have a radiant quality to them. They're close enough now for me to see markings on them. It's a type of swastika. 11:35 hours. Our radio crackles and a voice comes through in English with what perhaps is a slight Nordic or Germanic accent. The message is, "Welcome, Admiral, to our domain. We shall land you in exactly 7 minutes. Relax, Admiral, you are in good hands." I note the engine of our plane has stopped running. The aircraft is under some strange control. It is now turning itself. The controls are useless. We begin the landing process now. 11:45 hours. I'm making hasty last entries in the flight log. Several men are approaching on foot towards our aircraft. They are tall with blonde hair. In the distance I see a large shimmering city, pulsating with rainbow hues of colour. Good God. I do not know what's going to happen. Now, I see no signs of weapons on these approaching. I hear a voice ordering me by name to open the cargo door. I comply. The log continues after that. It relates what Bird... He basically was escorted by these craft, these flying wheels, he says. It's this beautiful city. There's a wise, enigmatic individual, and tells him that he's accidentally flown through the polar orifice into the inner earth. The lords of the inner earth want him to deliver a message to the leaders of the surface world that nuclear power and weapons were dangerous and must never be used under any circumstances. I don't know whether Bird ever delivered his message or not. Bird was sectioned in a psychiatric hospital soon after Operation Highjump. He spent the most of his remaining life. In 1949, Admiral Forrestal was declared insane and supposedly committed suicide by jumping out of an upstairs window on a psychiatric ward. Yeah, I mean, I've, as you know, I used to be a hospital porter. I think I've mentioned that a couple of times. You don't have psychiatric wards upstairs. If you do, you make sure the windows can't open. That's, you know, it's ridiculous that. I think Operation Highjump's true mission was very different to what official history tells us it was. Now, I don't go along with the inner Earth thing. This Bird, what happened to Admiral Bird? He may well have come across some kind of dimensional portal and gone through into another world. I think the true mission, though, like I said, is different. As far as Operation Highjump goes, I think the task force was sent in together with there's secret missions as well from Britain, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. Possibly other former Allied nations for another reason altogether. And the official story is a smokescreen. I think what they wanted to do, their primary goal at least, was to take out the Nazis in New Swabia and arrest or kill Hitler. I don't think, I mean, I don't know how much of Bird's, this secret log by Admiral Byrd is true or not, or whatever degree it's true. It could be a possibility to reach that city in another world and destroy or conquer it, unless there's disinformation going on here to shadow another secret operation. I don't know, maybe, and maybe it was not all American. Like I said, I know it was not just the Americans. Now we come to the British part of this story. This secret Southern War, it began with Operation Highjump, which was semi-secret. The British operation was completely secret. But it has been documented by a very interesting article in Nexus magazine, volume 12, whatever this one is. Let me have a look at the picture. What was it? Yeah, volume 12, number 5. Britain's secret war in Antarctica. Now, this was one of I think this is the first of a 3-part series of articles, but it set me off on this journey. Now, it's written by a guy called James Roberts, and he spoke to a guy, and he documents Britain's own contribution to bring down the Nazi regime in Antarctica, this has been overlooked. When I say overlooked, I mean suppressed, more like, even by clandestine histories. But Britain was militarily active in Antarctica all through World War II, and I'll say a bit more about that in a minute, but there's this thing, Operation Tabarin, which I'll talk about in a moment. This was before the US and the Russians. Now, I don't think it was just a motivation to destroy the enemy and end the war. Exactly as in Europe, it's exactly the same as this was played out. It was in parallel with the war in Europe 2 years earlier. But there was also the goal was also to gain Nazi high technology and recruit the scientists. Now, this has been denied to them because, see, the Americans, after the end of the war, there was Operation Paperclip. The Americans, the Soviets, the British, they all shared out the Nazi scientists. But America got most of them. The Soviets and Britain got fewer of them. Werner von Braun was an Operation Paperclip scientist. Hermann Oberth, the fathers of the NASA space program to land men on the moon, supposedly, and do all these other things in space. But there's this guy, basically James Roberts. He got in touch with a special forces operative who was redeployed from the post-war troubles in Palestine in 1946 to the Falkland Islands, where he underwent special training for a secret mission for which he was not pre-briefed. He was flown with a small unit of other commandos into New Swabia, where they found the Nazi base. And he describes these things called polar men, which appear to be Bigfoot-like creatures, and nearly everybody there was killed by these polar men. Now, he claims that the polar men were actually products of a Nazi genetic experiment. Now, the guy I met says otherwise. He says they're actually indigenous natural species. He says there are Bigfoot type creatures in Antarctica. I don't know which is true, or whether they may be both true. But anyway, these commandos, they land in New Swabia. They're flown in there. They land and travel down a tunnel, and they find a huge artificial cavern, which is a city and a base, and it has a U-boat port there. And they plan to demolish the installation with explosives, but the attack goes wrong. They have to fight their way out. Only 3 of these 10 men survive, and they're warned never to talk about what happened. So they receive no recognition for their endeavours, nor any memorial for those who never made it home. I tried to remedy that. I'll explain it a bit more in a minute. I tried to remedy the fact there's no memorial for them. Now, the soldier in the Nexus magazine, he reports after the war, the RAF continues to fly over New Swabia for many years, trying to find places for British bases, but it could be that the Nazi presence remained, and that the British didn't actually succeed. And according to my own contact, that is actually the case. That the Nazis actually were not defeated in New Swabia. The war ended in a stalemate. Now, in 2014, a very interesting book was published called Operation Tabarin by Stephen Hadlesly and Alan Carroll. And this reveals a previously untold story of a mission in 1944 to establish a British military presence in parts of Antarctica. This is very interesting. This is rather like Operation Highjump, but it took place 3 years earlier, and it was much more low-key. Just 2 small ships went in there with a crew of 14 Royal Navy sailors. One of them was a guy called George James. I wonder if he's related to James No, he can't be. It's James Roberts. No, it's just the same name, first and second names. But the Daily Mail covered this anyway. But this guy, George James, he describes his life in Antarctica: cold, very isolated. He got very depressed while he was there. But the ships sailed along the coast of Antarctica. They set up scientific bases on various islands and coves in the Antarctic Peninsula. Go back to the map I showed you earlier, you'll see where that is. But it's on the western end of the continent, south of Argentina. Now, they had to fight off leopard seals, which are these very fierce predators. And apparently even the penguins could become quite nasty when they're outnumbered. When they outnumber the humans, they can get quite nasty. They can get a bit pecky. And at some point, the soldiers had to actually capture penguin eggs because they had nothing else to eat, and they used to make omelettes out of them. It tasted foul, but they needed food. In fact, Mr. James says his unit encountered an Argentine base there where half the men had died of starvation and the other half had eaten the bodies of the others to stay alive. They'd had to turn to cannibalism. It's simply a brutal environment. Humans are not meant to be there. And so he's quite glad when that mission was over. He went back to Cardiff, where he still lives today, now an elderly man. But it's a well-designed book. I've had a little read. I've managed to get a copy. I've had a little read of it. I've not read it all, but it has a foreword by Her Royal Highness Princess Anne, the daughter of Her Reptileness the Queen. And it's described by the explorer Sir Ranulph Fiennes as a truly remarkable story. And Lieutenant Ian Graham has said something about this too. Now he's another member of the Operation Tabarin crew, who's one of the others who left alive. He was the skipper of the HMS William Scoresby, which was one of the ships which actually went down into Antarctica. And after Tabarin, it became semi-demilitarised and eventually became part of the British Antarctic Survey. But there have been restrictions. The government has never really made a formal statement about why Operation Tabarin took place. And this is the thing. And George James has never commented. He says he was never briefed in on the military mission's purpose. If he was briefed in, and he's obviously keeping it quiet now, even though this is 70 or more years later. But it's considered in the book a strategic reaction to World War II, which was going on at the time, of course. Germany was using some of the Antarctic islands as fueling stations for its U-boats and other ships. Now that's interesting. And then it mentions the conflict between Germany and other powers over the Nazi seizure of New Swabia in Queen Maud Land. That, of course, broke out before the war in 1938. There was also some concern that Japan would try to annex the Falkland Islands and use it as a base to enter the Atlantic and try to give the people in the Western Hemisphere a hard time. Or give the Falklands to Argentina, which was officially a neutral country, but of course was sympathetic to Hitler's Germany, and of course there's rumours that Hitler eventually settled in Argentina. Or was it a disinformation exercise? The Allies had a top-secret information source from breaking the German Enigma code at Bletchley Park. So they knew, it had been done by then, they knew about the Nazi bases and the ships in the Southern Ocean from the Enigma code. But they didn't want to tip the Germans off. They had to make it look as if the information had been obtained by more conventional methods, just for appearance's sake. So maybe that's what Operation Tabarin was. It's also been suggested that Operation Tabarin might have been decided upon because the Foreign Office was concerned by American post-war objectives. Because, of course, this overwhelming grandiosity which materialised in 1946, just 2 years later, when Operation Highjump took place. A huge fleet of ships sent to Antarctic waters. So the theme of the book is that rather than being related directly to World War II, it was effectively the first shot in the Falklands War of 1982, and perhaps the Cold War, or perhaps, in terms of the Cold War, rivalry within NATO. Its purpose was to assert British territorial claims to the southern polar region, head off Argentina's ambitions. Argentina had already got a base on Deception Island, in Graham Land, and this is rather like what happened in Southern Theule many years later in the 70s. That's right, and of course 38 years after after Operation Tabarin, what did Argentina do? It invaded and occupied the Falkland Islands in 1982 after it was unseated shortly afterwards, and there's a whole load of stories about that. I mean, look at what David Griffin's been talking about and Miles Johnson from the Bases Project. So the real motives for the Falklands War are nebulous on both sides. The official pronouncements ring with insincerity and deception, and I think this does too. And we've got to consider the possibility that also, as George James said, so as James, the other guy, said, who wrote the Nexus article, British military involvement in Antarctica did not end with World War II. And as I said, this is where my friend comes in, who sadly passed away. Or maybe it's to do with, I mean, who knows, maybe the truth will be revealed one day. I hope so, but unfortunately my friend Jack, or friend, I don't know, my acquaintance Jack, won't be taking part in that, which is very, very sad. And now we come to the odd behaviour of the Nazi U-boats at the end of the war, this Nazi submarine fleet. Basically, the submarines were captured all over the place. They surrendered, or they were captured, and some of them were carrying cargoes, and the crew had unusual tales to tell. Now, one U-boat, German submarine, and then they call them U-boats, but it's basically a submarine. It's like astronaut and cosmonaut, it's a political thing. But one boat was caught near Singapore. It was trying to transit the Strait of Malacca and was detected. And it had lots of barrels of mercury on board. So what was the mercury for? And that's a mystery, unless you read books by people like Joseph Farrell, where he talks about how the Nazis built a mercury-powered aircraft. Now this is not just a plane. This is something which is anti-gravity propulsion. It's called the Bell, or the Beehive. I've talked about this before. And there's a guy called Rudolf Hess. Now Rudolf Hess actually in 1941 he flew solo on his own from Germany all the way to Scotland and demanded a parley with the Duke of Hamilton. The Duke of Hamilton was a friend of his. They'd been writing to each other for quite a long time, and he wanted to meet him face to face, and he had a very important message. We don't know the entire reason for that message. Some people say he wanted to propose an alliance between Germany and Britain against the Soviet Union. We don't know, but anyway, his demand was rejected, and maybe he had other things to say. That's what's interesting, because Hess was imprisoned. He was in prison for the rest of his life in Spandau prison in Berlin, and he died in 1987. I mean, he was the last prisoner in there. They just kept the place open for him, but they would not let him out. They wouldn't, and they would forbid him visitors. It was sad because he was, he was just kept there. I mean, he hadn't actually been charged with anything, and he was just locked up for no reason at all. And he didn't have much contact with many people, so he lived a sad, lonely life. He was kept in solitary confinement the whole time. But he was the people he did meet regularly were his British intelligence interrogators. He was debriefed thoroughly, and what he said, and what was talked about is still top secret. It's likely to remain so, indefinitely top secret. Did he tell people about the things I've been talking about here? What secrets did the Nazis have, those who escaped? Or if they committed suicide, what did they take to their graves? And other Nazis were captured too, and this is where Operation Paperclip comes in, and they had their brains picked. It's very unlikely that Britain didn't learn a hell of a lot about Antarctica and what the Nazis were doing down there. And they must have used this intelligence in the campaign, which they fought in 1947 to 48. Now, it seems a key figure in this is Admiral Karl Dönitz. Now, he was commander-in-chief of the submarine fleet, and he also, strangely enough, Hitler appointed him successor to the Third Reich after Hitler supposedly shot himself, which it was only about a day, I think, he was Führer. But he gave him complete authority over what was left of Hitler's territories, and that's the perfect combination to realise an escape plan. Command of submarine fleet, head of the entire country. Now, after his trial at Nuremberg, this is interesting because Nuremberg was it was absolutely horrible. I mean, people were just hanged left, right, and centre. I mean, maybe some of them deserved it, but many of them didn't. But Dönitz got off with just 10 years in jail. Now, the official story is that Chester Nimitz stood up for him because the Americans borrowed his Wolfpack submarine tactics, and the Admiral Chester Nimitz, Admiral Nimitz, he was very keen. He defeated Japan in the Pacific using these methods, but Dönitz didn't make sense because Dönitz didn't give the US Navy plans of his own free will, did he? Nimitz copied him. Just copied him inadvertently. There has to be more. Did Admiral Karl Dönitz do a deal with his prosecutors? Information in exchange for leniency. He did a plea bargain with them. I don't know. I mean, what happened after the war was the intrigue continued, but in 1961 the Antarctic Treaty was signed. This turned the entire continent into the world's largest nature reserve, a huge no man's land. So basically, but there are still stories of skirmishes there. Between the Cold War powers on the continent. There's rumours circulating about nuclear weapons testing. Nexus has covered this. Biological agents. Maybe that's why the Huskies were given vaccines for Operation Highjump. It's weird. There's even this thing called the Black Ray. There's a photograph showing a black line across the sky in Antarctica, and I mean, this is a really interesting stuff. Now, there's all kinds of things that have been said. For instance, Richard Hoagland has put his foot in now. He's waded in. He talks about Lake Vostok. Now, Lake Vostok is a huge a lake under the ice. A huge lake. It's been sealed up probably for 30 to 40 million years. So we could find anything down there. Very big. It's 3,000 feet deep. It is an area of Northern Ireland. So there's plenty of room for a lot down there. Even Richard Hoagland talks about ice cities under the ice. I mean, I don't know. But it's funny, but there was going to be an exploration of Lake Vostok from the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, which has been cancelled. And some people in that area, there's a base called Vostok, which is run by the Russians, and a lot of people there have been falling ill. Now that is interesting, isn't it? That is very interesting indeed. How strange, how strange, how strange. Will we ever find out the truth?
So yeah, it was 7 p.m. in a pub, and this guy turned up, and I said, "What's your name?" He said, "Just call me Jack." And I looked at him and I said, I didn't say it at first, but later on I just looked at him and I gave him a look, and later on I did say to him, "Is that your real name?" And he said no. But he didn't give me any personal details about himself. When he turned up, he had this woman with him, a younger woman. Now he's like quite old, and I would say she was in her 40s or 50s, a bit younger than him. And she turned up with him, but she never spoke to me. She just smiled and sort of waved. She never spoke to me, and then she left. She walked off and left the pub, and I never saw her again. She came up and picked him up again at 10 p.m. I think she must have driven him or something from his home. She came back at 10 p.m. and picked him up. Now, I don't know if this could have been his daughter. It might have been a younger sister, or maybe even a younger partner. You know, some women like the older men. Anyway, Jack is he was this fit-looking guy who looked about the right age to have been a young man in the 1940s, which is when he joined an infantry regiment. He wouldn't say which one. He wouldn't say what his unit was. But he did take part in the invasion of Europe in 1945. And after the war was over, he actually served in Germany as part of the occupying force. He was quite he had like I couldn't identify his accent, but he sounded kind of like down to earth, quite working class. Maybe I'm just being prejudiced, but he wasn't posh, so probably he wasn't an officer. Then again, in the war, it was wartime, you never know. People were promoted quickly and commissions were handed out quite quickly. But he wouldn't tell me the name of his unit or regiment or anything like that. He wouldn't say what rank he'd achieved. But he was a affable, intelligent chap with it, dressed smartly and nice clothes on. If anything, he was a bit over-exuberant to begin with. He was with it. He wasn't senile or anything. He was cogent. But I mean, maybe he was a bit nervous, maybe a bit insecure, and he was a bit over-exuberant. He made a lot of jokes. He laughed. But he did say to me, I'm breaking the secrecy codes and the oath I took, and I could be jailed for this. And he'd actually been threatened soon after he came back to England after the war, when he came back from Antarctica. And he said that the other veterans had the same treatment. And he's got children, he's got grandchildren, he's worried about their safety. But he wanted to just tell someone what he knew. He just said it was a secret he'd lived with. I don't think he was he didn't necessarily say anything like, he didn't say the world needs to know this. He didn't say anything like that. He just said, I want to tell someone about it. And he said the world we live in is just a cover story for so much more. And of course that's what I've always said. And he said he was into conspiracy theories. He was quite interested in conspiracy theories. And that's how he found out about me. I think he didn't read Hapanwo at first because I'd only just started it, but when I met him again in 2008, he sort of said a few things that made me think he'd been reading Hapanwo, but I didn't ask him, have you read Hapanwo? But he was kind of like, I think he was looking for personal peace of mind more than anything else. But he had a couple of pints of beer, and we talked about sport, we talked about weather. There's a lot of small talk, and it's funny thing is he didn't sort of start with the small talk and focus on the subject. He mixed the small talk in with it, and sometimes I had to sort of prompt him to get back on the subject. But he wouldn't let me take notes. I mean, I brought a notebook and a pen with me, and he wouldn't let me write anything down. He said, "Don't do that, please." He just said. So I just had to remember it all and write it down when I got home. And so I'd ask him some questions, and sometimes he'd answer in detail, and then other times he'd just he'd just roll his eyes like that, and he'd sort of shake his head. He was a strange chap. Yeah. I mean, I did ask him about Admiral Byrd, and I remember he said Admiral Byrd was less crazy than the doctors who committed him. Now what Jack had done, I mean, the gist of the story was he'd been part of a war. He'd been part of a military unit that actually took part in a battle in Antarctica after the official end of World War II. Now, as I said, Operation Highjump took place in the season 1946 to 1947 season. The British operation that Jack took part in was the season after, from between 1947 and 1948. Now he'd had a lot of experience because he said that he'd taken part in raids on safe houses, the SS safe houses. These are the Nazi paramilitary units that went underground after the war. He took part in raids on their bases, basically. Maybe he was special forces of some kind, I don't know. But anyway, what happened was he also went to Palestine. He actually took part in what was going on in Palestine. Palestine was just before the start of Israel, just before the birth of the fiefdom of Israel, which I don't recognise as a legitimate nation state, as I said in other films, but for intents and purposes it was created, and there was a lot of problems. There was the bombing of the King David Hotel by the Irgun terrorist group, things like that, where a lot of British personnel were killed, and he was involved in that. He was involved in the troubles there, which the low scale, constant warfare that continued right up to the signing of the agreement which brought Israel into existence. What is wrongly called the Jewish state. It's not a Jewish state. That's a long subject. Anyway, what happened was, in the end, he was actually selected. He said he was actually taken after he'd been in Palestine and Germany. He was sent to South Africa, where he trained. He did some training, and then he was sent to Antarctica. And he said that he took part in an assault, basically on a base. That was the showcase of this military operation, was an assault that he took part in, a large scale assault on a German military base. there was a large construction. There was a lot under construction at the time they assaulted the area. There was a big military centre there, including the base there. But there was obviously Hitler had plans to build something much bigger. Maybe this was the new Berlin. But Jack doesn't know what he didn't know what happened to Hitler. He didn't know if he was captured or killed. But he said there's a lot of stuff still there. A lot of the buildings are still there, including and he said he read a report somewhere, and he didn't tell me where. And I'd love to find this report. If anyone has seen it, please let me know. He read a report of from a couple of years ago of some people in Antarctica, some scientists, some British scientists operating in Antarctica, in that area, who came across some burnt out tanks, some 1940s tanks, and he said that Jack said this made him feel good. It made him feel vindicated. It was a confirmation. Now, I've not seen this, but basically they basically moved in on this using tanks and infantry onto this German stronghold, and he said it's still there. You can see the entrance to this place, and you can see the remains of the base. It's a massive complex. There's a lot of underground stuff there, and we know that the Germans were also building massive underground complexes in Germany and in Czechoslovakia and Poland. Project Riesa, for example, which is a huge network of underground caverns, which is a project on the scale of the Channel Tunnel. And in the last couple of years of the war, the Nazis did it. There's an underground harbour there for U-boats. There's a fully enclosed harbour which you can only access from underwater. And he said there's an artificial cavern. It's got an entrance 50 feet below the sea, where the U-boats used to go in. It's about 1,000 feet wide. It's 200 feet from top to bottom. It's a huge opening where U-boats can sail in, and they can surface inside this cave, and there's like a harbour for them. And there was the Type 21s I talked about. They were there. And he said that there was a nuclear-powered submarine there, which is remarkable. An experimental nuclear-powered submarine, because this was years before Admiral Rickover and the Nautilus, which was the official first nuclear submarine which was built in America. Now, Jack told me that 1,700, he estimated 1,700 British troops never came home. They were killed. And he's not sure because he didn't know all of them. It was very compartmentalised. But like I said, he wasn't allowed to mention a single thing when he got back. The newspapers ignored it. They may never even have found out. Yeah, it was sad. But then he just went home. I mean, this woman turned up, and he just said goodnight and left. But he told me all about this, and I remembered as much of it as I wrote down as much of it as I could. I kept notes. Eventually, he gave me permission to sort of talk about it on the forum, and then in 2008, he gave me permission to write about it on Hapanwo. But then in 2008, see, this guy on the forum got in touch with me again, who'd previously been on the forum. He actually got in touch with me by email this time. And he said, can you meet up with Jack again? And so I said, yes. So I went and I talked to this guy. I met him in a public place in this town again. And then he wouldn't give me the details on the phone. I had to talk to him privately. And then he said, I'll make arrangements. And I chose to meet, and he said, where's a good place to meet in Oxford on a weekday night where it's quiet and it's out of the way and it's secluded. And I gave him the name of a pub, and a different pub this time. And it's one I don't normally visit. I always chose pubs I didn't normally visit because I didn't want people I know butting in. I didn't want to be left private. I didn't want people I know being there and seeing us. And so he turned up again with the same woman. And and again she left us alone to speak. And he just repeated a lot of stuff that he'd said before. I mean, he explained. I mean, I'd mentioned on the forum, someone had said, well, how did this work? Because how did the tanks operate in that cold climate? Because why didn't their fuel freeze? And he said, oh, they were, and he said they were adapted. Jack said these tanks were adapted. And I asked him that in the second meeting. I said, well, what do you know about this article by Robert James, or James Roberts, or whatever he's called? And he said, well, he knew about it because I'd been talking about it on the forum, and he'd read it. But he wasn't anything to do with that. Now, I did wonder for a while if Jack might have been Robert James, or James Roberts, whatever his name is, contact. I thought maybe Jack is his contact, but it wasn't. He said no. But he, at the time, in 2008, he knew he was certain there were two other Antarctic soldiers still alive. And maybe some others he's not aware of. So, who knows? He also said something very strange. He said that the Yanks went there, but they weren't just after Hitler. They were after some kind of valuable minerals, but it wasn't coal or oil. But he never really elaborated on that. I should have pressed him on that a bit. Sorry about that. He never said, he never saw any flying saucers. He never said anything like that. He never saw any crystal cities. But then in the end, he just up and left. Again, I don't think he had any desire to be a public whistleblower, but I think he was inadvertently, maybe subconsciously, he wanted to be, and I was his conduit. I think meeting Jack actually made me think twice about some of the stuff I was getting into, and made me take it more seriously. Because I was kind of like, I think there's a change in my writing, the way I did things, between before and after I met Jack. And that's and then that's the last I heard of him. I mean, the second meeting was more casual than the first one. Actually, we played a game of dominoes, for example. But that's the last I heard about him. In 2010, I found out from the middleman that Jack was ill, and I actually said something on a video. I said, I hope he's all right. I hope he gets well soon. I made a little article about it as well. And he did, obviously, and I heard a bit later on that he was okay. And you see, I did take this to the point where there was a Remembrance Day, and I'll put a link in the description box to this. On Remembrance Day in Oxford, there was always a big celebration at the War Memorial on St Giles. No, on St Giles. Yeah, there's a big war memorial there between the two churches on St Giles, and there's a lot of the cadets and that, and the Veterans March. And I'm not a one for war memorial, for remembrance and things like that. I've talked about this before, how I don't like the way it's done. I don't think it sort of tends to treat war as something glorious and wonderful rather than a tragedy. And it is a tragedy. I think war is a tragedy, and it's a ritual sacrifice. I mean, I've explained in previous videos how I believe that the Great War of 1914 to 1918 was a mass satanic ritual. It was a sacrifice of millions of young men, and you only have to see the centenary celebrations to know that, and I've written about that. That the blood thing, the poppies representing blood, falling from an aircraft, pouring out the windows at Tower of London. But I went along to the War Memorial the following year, and I took with me some poppies and a card, and I just wrote on the card, because there's no memorial for these guys. I just wrote on the card, for all the men who died in the British Antarctic War, 1947 to 48, and the American servicemen in the American Antarctic War, 1946 to 47, otherwise known as Operation Highjump. And I laid the poppies and the card on the war memorial. I don't know how long it stayed there before someone came and cleared it off, but I did that. I've made a video about that, link in the description box. And then if I don't want to give too much information away now, right? Because I don't want to. It's possible someone could identify Jack's family from what I'm saying, and I don't want to do that. But I was contacted a few days ago by the man I first met, the middleman, and he said, I'm sorry to bring this news, but I'm afraid Jack passed away. And he gave me the date he told me when Jack passed away, and it was a few months earlier. I'm not going to give you the exact date, but Jack died basically, it was in the spring of this year, put it that way. It was in the spring. I'm very sorry to hear that. As I said, I call him a friend. He's not, I don't think you can call someone you meet just twice for a couple of hours a friend. But he's someone I got on well with, and I appreciate what he's doing, and I appreciate him contacting me to come and tell me. I still don't know for certain if what he said was true or not. I mean, for all I know, he could have made the whole thing up. But he sounded sincere, and it seemed if it's a trick, it seemed a very elaborate trick to play, to travel a long way, contact somebody, spin him a yarn, and then go home, and to do that twice. I don't know who he is. His name may be on the memorials for World War II veterans now, and perhaps because he took part in 1945, the Allied invasions, 44-45. But he'll never be remembered for what he did in Antarctica. Maybe one day there will be a memorial, but at the moment there's not. And it makes me wonder how much more of what goes on in this world is never known, and that some people die, some people give their lives, whatever the cause might be, it's still a sacrifice, and that no one knows about the tragic loss of life. Yeah. A time might come, I hope, when I will know who Jack is. I'll know his real name, and I'll know where he's buried, and I'll go and visit his grave. But I don't want to know that yet, simply for safety reasons, for the safety of his family, for my own personal safety, and the safety of my family. Because what he revealed is obviously still highly secretive. It's highly restricted. But I just wanted to say, I'm glad I did what I did on that Remembrance Day. I'm glad I did at least put a poppy and a card on the war memorial for the soldiers who died in the or however many Antarctic campaigns there were. As far as I know, that's the nearest we've had to a memorial for those people. And again, I also want to pay tribute to anybody who has secrets, who speaks out and risks their life to do it. Whether it's Edward Snowden or Julian Assange, although, well, some people say those guys aren't genuine, maybe they're not. I'm not certain about that, but if they are genuine, and then deepest respect to them. And Jack, I don't know if you can call him a whistleblower. I think you can call him a whistleblower. I think he subconsciously wanted to be a whistleblower, even if he didn't want to overtly. Because he told me a story, and then 2 years later he gave me permission to talk about it. First on the forum, and then on her panwell. So that is blowing the whistle, and I think he should be counted among whistleblowers for that reason. So I don't know if they're watching or not, but whether or not they are, I want to wish Jack's family, whoever they are, my deepest condolences. And as for Jack himself, whoever he is, rest in peace. Thank you for watching Panwo TV. Hospital Porters, Pride and Dignity. Stop the New World Order.